I want you to do something crazy, drastic. Whatever age you are today, imagine yourself 5 years from now. So I'm 32, so I will be 37. It's not that funny. Okay, no, actually, I am 45. That's the truth. So 5 years ago, okay, I was 40. 5 years from now, I'm going to be 50. And that just sounds crazy when I say it out loud. But however old you are, just imagine yourself in 5 years. And so think first week of June, 2023. What are you going to be like? What kind of character will you have? What will you have accomplished between now and then in that 5-year span? And the reason that I kind of want us to think in terms of 5 years is because I think 5 years is just right. At least in my mind, it's just right. Because a lot of times when we do this kind of thing, we think in terms of 1 year. And that's fine. And we in January sometimes we'll make a New Year's resolution, right? What do I want to get done this year? What's the one thing I'm committed to this year? But for me, when I thought about this, my inner Goldilocks was just no, 1 year that's not enough. It's too small. 1 year is too short to do really big things. On the other hand, if I think 20 years, I'm just that's monstrous. I can't even get my mind around that. That feels like forever. So I kind of like the 5-year span. 1 is too small, 20 is too big, 5 is just right. And maybe you're well, what about 7? What about 10? Why did you jump all the way to 20? Why'd you go from 1 to 20? And I'll just go, I don't know, so shut up. It just feels right, okay? Sheesh. It just feels kind of within reach. But it's enough time to have something actually happen. So imagine yourself in 2023. What do you want to be like? What do you want to have accomplished? Who do you want to become? And I want to kick this off with an observation, and maybe you would agree with this. It seems to me more and more we're living in a right now culture. We want really big things to happen, and we want them to happen immediately with very little effort. In fact, if you're a millennial or younger, this is the stereotype of you and your generation, right? You're not patient. You want big results with very little effort. You don't stay with stuff for very long. You bounce, you quit, you move on. I mean, this is the millennial stereotype. And I know a lot of millennials that don't fit it. Kate, when you watch this online, I want you to know you don't fit that. But what I'll tell you is that I see this I see us experiencing a little bit of a cultural shift. It's not just millennials. More and more and more, we are reluctant to kind of stay with stuff. And more, I think what's happening is we underestimate what we can do in the long term. We underestimate what we can do in the long term. And we way overestimate what we can do in the short term. And this can be a real roadblock. We look at a short period of time and we think we should be able to do so much so fast. Then we look at a long period of time and we way underestimate what we could actually accomplish if we devoted ourselves to something and stuck with it. And so more and more we're living in this tragically short attention span era. We lack this stick-with-itness. It just kind of seems to be evaporating from our culture. And we just sort of jump ship the minute that we're not happy anymore. We jump ship the minute that it starts to get a little bit hard. And so sometimes we just don't stay with stuff long enough to actually experience significant impact. Now I'll tell you, here's an area where I know some stuff. This is especially true in the church world. These days, the average pastor stays in their church. This is lead pastor. Anyone want to guess how long the average lead pastor stays in their church? How many years? Okay. It's actually just under 3. It's 2 point something. Okay. The average pastor stays in the church less than 3 years. It's I come in, I get to know a few people, I cast a little vision, and then I'm gone. I'm out. And I mean, you think about it and go, what in the world could somebody accomplish in that kind of time span? How can you make an impact on a community or in people's lives if you don't give yourself long enough to actually hit your stride? And this is true, I think, in all kinds of areas for all of us. It's true professionally, it's true relationally, it's true in trying to acquire new skills, it's true in developing knowledge around certain topics. And what happens is we overestimate what we can do in the short term, and when it doesn't happen, we're frustrated, and yet we underestimate what we could do in the long term if we just stuck with something. And so that's the heart behind this series, You in 5 Years. So who could you be by 2023 if you really got after it? Like if you trusted that God was actually up to something in you and up to something around you. If you trusted that God who gave you his Son and who gave you his Spirit is for you and he's not against you. Who could you be 60 months from now? What could you do? What could you accomplish in 5 years? And so let me invite you to imagine for a second. What could you do in 5 years? Because 5 years is enough time to accomplish quite a bit, actually. I mean, so what if you got creative and you made a list of what you could actually do in 5 years? What could you do if you gave something serious effort for 5 years? And if you were to make a list, you could almost think of it in two ways. You could think positive and negative. You could almost create two very different lists. Because 5 years is time to do a lot of good, right? But it's also enough time to get wrapped up in a lot of bad stuff. So let me share with you just a couple of sample lists. On my positive list, you could pretty much become fluent in a new language in 5 years. That's enough time to become fluent. And you think about that, you could say, you know what? I want to learn Spanish, Espanol. I'm well on my way. And in 5 years, guys, you could actually do that. You could do it. And then think of this, guys, man, you could watch all of those Spanish TV shows, all those super seductive Spanish soap operas, and you could know what those guys are saying. I'm just saying, you might learn something. Right? And then you could go to your wife and you could say, mi amor, tu estar especialmente hermoso esta noche. So, see, I'm well on my way. Actually, what happened is I took a Spanish translator app and I typed in, my love, you are especially beautiful tonight. And that's what it gave me. Does anybody speak Spanish? We have one in here. Was I anywhere close? I was kind of close. So, yeah. And some of you go, well, why would you choose my love? You are especially beautiful to me tonight in Spanish. Because I'm a pastor, and that's dirty talk for me, okay? So, yeah, babe. So I haven't learned Spanish but in 5 years, man, I could. You could be fluent in another language in 5 years. In 5 years, you could get a degree. I mean, you could go back to school. In 5 years, you could have a degree in something and think about what that might mean for you. It could be a whole new world of opportunity. Maybe you're in your situation, you go, I don't know that a degree would help me that much, so maybe you'd say, you know what? In 5 years, I could acquire a new skill. Because is 5 years long enough to learn something and develop a new aptitude? Usually, depending on what it is, sure it is. If you stay with it and you pour yourself into it long enough, or you can binge watch Netflix for the next 5 years. It's totally your choice. Sorry, that was kind of negative. I haven't actually gotten to that list yet. There's more positive stuff. In 5 years, you could master a sport or a hobby. I mean, if you trained for it, most of you, if you trained for it, you could easily run a marathon 5 years from now. If you trained for it, you really could. 5 years from now, you could read 60 books, and all you'd have to do is read one book a month. And so let's say the average book you read is 200 pages. Guys, that's 6 pages a day. And you think about what you could learn. Think about what you could learn. Like if you read 60 books on a particular topic, you would virtually become an expert on whatever that topic is in 5 years. And I'll tell you, when I became a Christian, I was 20 years old. And by the time I was 25, I had actually devoured Christian books by the droves because I was so intrigued by how this all works. I don't know if it was 60, but it was a lot. And God really used that to give me a firm foundation. And I needed it because coming into my faith, I knew absolutely nothing. I couldn't tell you the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. 5 years later, I was preaching and I was teaching in churches. It's actually amazing what you can do in 5 years. You think about like spiritual disciplines, even very simple ones. You think about spiritual disciplines, very simple ones, being practiced for 5 years. In the last few years, if you've been around Brookview, we've talked a lot about the discipline of soaping, of reading scripture and then journaling. And Jen and I, when we're inviting people into this, we usually encourage them to try soaping 3 times a week. Okay, so 3 times a week you read scripture, maybe 6 to 8 minutes worth, and then you journal for maybe 5 minutes. So I did the math on that. If I were to soap 3 times a week for 5 years, that would be 780 soaps in 5 years. And do you think God would grow you? Do I feel like God would grow me through that? Here's what I'll tell you. I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I feel like it's been unbelievable. And so just to give you like a visual of this, for me, when I'm soaping, I usually write about a page and a half. I have magnificent handwriting, and I write in about a 14-point font. My good friend James Fan writes in about a 2-point font. And so it takes me a page and a half, what takes him about 3 lines. But for me, it's a page and a half. So 780 soaps. If I go a page and a half, then the next day when I start on a new page. So that would be about 1,560 pages of soaping. And just to show you what that would look like in a 5-year period, this right here is what that would look like. This is just reading scripture and journaling about it, okay? This one right here, it should say on here, but it doesn't, how many pages it is. Oh, 80 sheets, there we go. So 160 pages. The next one's 200 pages, 200 pages. There's a common theme here. 200 pages. And you just go through that. And guys, in 5 years, these would be filled with my thoughts and my interactions with God. That's pretty astounding when you think about it. 3 times a week for 10, 15 minutes a day. That's all that it would take to be able to do that. 5 years is enough time to do something pretty significant if you stay with it. So that's kind of the sample, like positive list. There's also a lot of negative. There's a lot of negative you can do in 5 years. 5 years from now, you could be finalizing the details of a really ugly divorce because for 5 years, you neglected your marriage and you neglected your spouse. 5 years is long enough to get majorly addicted to something. And there's a lot of things you could get addicted to. 5 years is plenty of time to do that. Something that will steal life from you. 5 years is long enough to have worked 5, 6, 7 jobs that you partially applied yourself to before getting quit or being let go. 5 years is long enough to rack up a mountain of credit card debt, to pack on 30 extra pounds, or smoke 36,500 cigarettes. And all you'd have to do is smoke 1 pack a day. Some of you are like, what? Dude, you're like getting down on cigarettes and smoking? You're one of those pastors, huh? Just want to say, hold on. Sometimes I get asked, like, Pastor, can you smoke cigarettes and be a Christian? And I'm like, that's kind of a weird question. Like, what do you mean? Tell me more about that. Well, I mean, will smoking keep me from going to heaven? And I'm like, oh, no. You probably get there a whole lot faster. Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal. 5 years is enough time to do a lot. You can do so much in 5 years, for good or for evil. And so by 2023, the reality is you will have traveled enough road for you to do a heck of a lot in one direction or another. And so this series is all about, like, let's use our time wisely. Like, let's make the most of it. But here's what makes this so powerful and so beautiful for those of us that follow Jesus. When we entrust ourselves to Him, we're not just living life on our own, in our own power. We're actually engaging in, like, the most beautiful thing, the kingdom of God, like, on earth. And I want to read you what I think is a beautiful passage written by Paul. And if you're like a skeptic when it comes to Christianity or religious things, then you can relate to Paul. Paul thought that all followers of Jesus were deceived. Paul was convinced that Jesus was a complete fraud. And so Paul was a Jewish religious leader, a Pharisee, that was out hunting down Christians and imprisoning them. But while he was leading this massive persecution, he encountered Jesus. And that encounter changed him deeply. He went from hating Jesus and hating followers of Jesus to becoming the most influential follower of Jesus that has ever lived. And Paul was so overwhelmed by what God was up to in Jesus that after resisting all of it initially, he gave his life to it. And Paul went on to explain it better than anyone and to spread it farther than anyone. Now, Paul had always wanted to go to Rome in his life to tell people about Jesus, but he had been unable to go for various reasons. So he wrote an epic letter to just a few Christians, just a handful of Christians in Rome that had come to be believers and followers of Jesus. And in his letter to the Romans, what we call the book of Romans, this has been one of the most foundational Christian texts in history. And the good news of Jesus is explained thoroughly, and it's explained clearly, and it's one of the most profound writings of all time, in my opinion. But toward the end of the letter, after he's explained what Jesus is like and what Jesus did and why all of that matters, he reflects on what it means and what we should do with it now. And he invites us to be awake to what God is doing. He's like, this is incredible, so don't miss it. And he starts with this. He writes to the Christians that he had not yet met in the city of Rome. He says, "But make sure that you don't get so absorbed and exhausted in taking care of all your day-to-day obligations that you lose track of time and doze off, oblivious to God." Man, do you ever feel absorbed and exhausted? You ever feel like you're pretty unaware of what God is doing? It's so easy to let this happen, right? Because we have day-to-day obligations, and we get consumed, and we get overwhelmed, and pretty soon we can be asleep, like unaware of God and His presence and what He's doing all around us. Paul continues. He said, "The night is about over. Dawn is about to break. Be up and awake to what God is doing. God is putting the finishing touches on the salvation work." Okay, on the salvation work, and come back to that in a sec. He began when we first believed. And I think this is such a cool picture. He's like, be up and awake. Do not sleep on this. God is up to something incredible in you and all around you if you will participate in it. And Paul says that God is putting the finishing touches on what he calls His salvation work. So what does that mean? What is God's salvation work? Well, I want to warn you, I'm about to go all Southern preacher on you. We're going to use some theological terms and we're going to say them with some gusto. So the moment that you put your faith in Jesus, you were justified. You were declared not guilty of all sin, past, present, and future, because Jesus did the time, because Jesus paid the debt. You are declared not guilty. You are justified. And then one day when you see Jesus face to face, will be glorified. Because you've said, Jesus, I want to be like you. Make me like you. Give me your heart of love and kindness and goodness. Help me be fully controlled by the Spirit. Help me live completely in the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all of that. And Jesus, one day, when you see him face to face, will grant your wish and complete all of it. He will look at you, he will smile, and he will say, it is finished. And the struggle with sin and selfishness will be over for you once and for all. And this is going to be extraordinary. And we call that glorification. So say it with me like a Southern preacher. Glorification. One more time. Glorification. There we go. One day, my friends, there will be glorification. But if you're a follower of Jesus and you're living in the now, then in the meantime, Jesus is up to something else that's beautiful. Day by day, moment by moment, as you follow him, as you stay connected to him, he makes you, bit by bit, little by little, more like him. And the theological word for that is sanctification. So we are sanctified. First, we're justified. One day we will be glorified. But in this life, we are being sanctified. That's good. That is good. Can I get a witness? Yes. We are sanctified. God is putting the finishing touches on his salvation work. Paul goes on, he says, we can't afford to waste a minute, must not squander these precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence. Okay, don't live a life that's frivolous, that's trivial, that's shallow, and don't indulge the parts of you that are unchristlike. Don't feed that stuff. Don't fill yourself with that. Feed the right stuff. And then Paul finishes his thought by saying, get out of bed and get dressed. Don't loiter and linger, waiting until the very last minute. Dress yourselves in Christ and be up and about. I just think that's such a powerful picture. Don't lay around asleep. Don't be walking through this life asleep. Get up and dress yourself in Christ. And I guess if I were to summarize this passage very simply, maybe I'd say it this way. God is up to something amazing, so wake up and take part in it. Because you can sleep and you can miss out. Or you can get up and you can get dressed and you can walk into the dawn and start seeing and experiencing power. So I want to say right from the outset that this series and this message, this is not about like self-help. It's about entrusting ourselves to the process of sanctification. It's about allowing God to do something transformative in us. This is about you in 5 years. Who are you becoming? What will you be like 5 years from now? What kind of character will you have? And so for the rest of the message, I want to share with you 3 principles that I think are really important when it comes to this stuff. And the first one is this. Future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. Future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. We tend to think about the future like so romantically. It's this mysterious thing, and we think, oh, who am I going to be in the future? I'll tell you who you're going to be in the future. You're going to be exactly like you, just exaggerated. You want to know what you're going to look like in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Just imagine yourself with more miles on the odometer. What do I mean? Okay, I mean, like if you're a person who is kind today, you're going to be kinder in the future. Because these things deepen. They get entrenched in us over time. These things mature over time. If you're generous today, you're going to become even more generous in the future. And so if that's you, then you can just picture this more generous person, someone that looks a whole lot like you, but older and more generous. And so that's pretty cool. You can imagine a kinder, more generous you. But if right now you're somebody who's actually a pretty cruel person, the future you is going to be even more cruel. If today you're a highly negative person, The future you will be even more negative. Think about this. Envision the people that you know that are 70 years old or older. Here's what I've noticed. They tend to be become kind of extreme by that age. I mean, I have met some really, really crabby 70-year-olds. I mean, just like crotchety. And you know what they were like when they were 30? They were crabby. And they were negative, but with smoother skin. But then the crabbiness sort of just went unchecked, and it got more. And this is what happens with selfish people too, right? Like they get more selfish as the years go by. But you can also see this when it comes to things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and all of that as well. In fact, as I was writing this message and I was thinking about this topic, there was one person that just kept flashing to my mind. A woman that many of us know that really has embodied what it looks like to have these things be a part of who she is and then just watch them get magnified as the years go by. And her name is Eloise Rankin. And I mean, what a beautiful woman. My goodness. And if you know Eloise, you are a lucky person because she is an extraordinary woman. She is a gorgeous woman. And not just on the outside. She has this gorgeous character. And I think of the fruits of the Spirit of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And Eloise just embodies those. And I was hoping that she would be here this morning, and I was going to talk right to her. So forgive me for a minute, because I'm hoping she'll watch this online. Eloise, I'm talking right to you. I will just tell you, you embody those to me. I think about love, and I see how you love your kids and your grandkids, and I see how you love the people in your life group and the friends that you've had for many, many decades. I see how you love Monica and Haley and all the people that you've gotten to know. And I'll tell you, here's what I feel like when I'm with you. I feel loved by you. I feel valued and respected and admired. And I know that you're in my corner. And I think about the joy. Man, if you know Eloise, is she not just like the epitome of joy? It's almost ridiculous. Like it just bubbles out of her. Even when life has been really, really tough, there's been joy. If you knew her when she lost Al, when he went to be with Jesus, and the joy was there, it just remained. I mean, her smile and her laugh, it just can melt your heart. And peace, man, Eloise, you are a woman at rest. Like not striving to prove yourself, just free to be content, free to love and serve and give, and patience. Gosh, you're not easily angered. You're so steady. Kindness. My goodness. Just one of the kindest people that I know. And so I didn't know Eloise when she was 30, but I feel like I did. I feel like I did because you know what she was like? She was all of those things. And what's happened is she has just grown into them and they have matured year after year after year until you see this woman now before you. Those things have just taken root and they've matured. She's lived her life in pursuit of the good. She's gone on a long walk in the same direction toward character and goodness. And now the fruits of the Spirit just embody her. And for those of us that know her, are we not so lucky to know her? She is the truest kind of blessing. But that didn't just happen all of a sudden. It didn't happen all of a sudden. Eloise has become a more exaggerated version of who she was many, many years ago. And this is how it works. It really isn't that mysterious. Whatever path you're on, future you is just you further down that path. Proverbs says it this way. The one who seeks good finds delight, the student of evil becomes evil. Whatever direction you're going, this is saying whatever direction you're going, you will get farther into it. So when you think about future you, you need to realize future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. And so now if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, that's kind of fatalistic, Pastor. Are you saying I can't change? Are you saying I can't become something better? Okay, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you keep doing what you're doing, whatever it is you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting, only more of it. Which leads me to my second thought on all of this, and this is encouraging, I think. If you don't like what you're getting, you have to change what you're doing. It's rocket science. I'll say it again because that was so complex it might have been hard. If you don't like what you're getting, you have to change what you're doing. And this is good news because if you don't like what you're doing, you can change. If you don't like what you're getting, you can change what you're doing. In the last few years, here's sort of what the measuring stick I've been using for my life. I'm asking myself on a regular basis, am I seeing the fruits of the Spirit in an increasing measure in my life? Am I seeing love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control more and more and more in my life? Paul says that if things are working right, if sanctification is happening, then I should see those things in increasing measure over time. That's what spiritual maturity looks like. So every so often I do a little check and I ask, am I seeing those things in increasing measure in me? And many of you know that this last season has been incredibly painful for me, for my whole family, really. It's just been sad and frustrating and heartbreaking, and I don't want to get into all of that this morning, but it's been hard. And so a few weeks ago, I was doing my normal assessment. Am I seeing the fruits of the Spirit in increasing measure in my life? And I was deeply struck by the reality that over the last 4 or 5 weeks, I'm not. In this last month or so, I'm moving in the wrong direction. Like some of my spiritual disciplines have waned a little bit in this season, which is the wrong thing to do. When life is hard, we need to do that stuff more, and I haven't done that. And as I looked at my heart and my attitude recently, I was like, uh-oh. Like, I'm slowly becoming less loving. I'm slowly becoming less joyful, less filled with peace. I'm becoming significantly less patient. And if you've been around me, you know what I'm talking about. It's this other stuff, this stuff that I don't want is just sort of bubbling out of me. And I'm like, man. Now, it's only been a few weeks. And the steps in the wrong direction have been small and they've been slow. But when I take this and I exaggerate it and I put it out there 5 years, it is frightening to me. I don't like what I see. So I've been having some pretty serious dialogues with God about all this. And a few weeks ago, I was soaping and I just was asking, and God touched me. And within 15 minutes with Him in the process of soaping, I just felt Him at work. And my heart came away from that in a much better spot, which was awesome. And then the next days came. And I'll tell you, like, it has just been a battle. Tuesday, Jen and I were driving home from the hospital where Cam is. And he's in a mental institution in Arlington, and it's been horrible. And we're driving home from there, and I just got hit with this like wave of despair. And I was like, man. And I thought about the reality of the situation, and I just like wept. Now, that's normal, and that's not altogether bad, okay? But I'm weeping, and Jen she was in her own world with happy thoughts, and she looks over at me, she's like, whoa, oh man. And the hard part of it was, I'm like, this is not a healthy cry. This is a cry of despair. This is a dark place. And God doesn't want me living there. I know that he doesn't, because it's a hopeless spot. So we had that event. That's Tuesday. Yesterday, I have to confess to you, something else happened, and I'm not proud of it. And in some religious traditions, all the people in the church have to come to the priest for confession, and they talk to the priest, and then the priest listens to their confessions. Right now, we're going to do the opposite. I'm going to confess something to you. You're not allowed to give me penance, but I'm going to confess something to you. Something happened that just felt really out of character for me. And again, we're in the car and we're driving. We're actually driving Brooklyn down to our 11-year-old daughter down to her basketball tournament in Ballard. And we're trying to exit I-5. And Jen's driving. I'm drawing up plays on the board for Brooklyn, and we're going over all the different offensive schemes and all that. And Jen's driving, and she's in the exit lane to get off the freeway where we need to get off. And at the same time, there's another lane that's merging onto the freeway. So there's a guy in a truck trying to merge onto the freeway. We're trying to merge off. And he just kind of speeds up and goes the same direction as her. And so we're getting closer and closer. She's like, yikes. So she goes back into the main freeway lane, speeds up a bunch, then gets over into the lane. And we're about to exit. I look up, all of a sudden, Jen has to slam on the brakes because this guy has gotten into the lane around us, sped up, gotten into our lane, slammed on the brakes, and then he told us that we're number one. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me, man? So I told him that he's number 11. And I was like, whoa. And I'm holding the basketball thing, and Brooklyn's looking at me like, I haven't done that for at least a couple days. I mean, I don't do that. I'm not a road rage sort of person. And so, but it's another thing where I'm going, what is going on with me? At dinner, we were talking about it. We're all laughing about it. And Brooklyn's like, it's okay, Dad. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. Don't ever do that. I will smack you. So this is not just a message, okay? This is not me pointing at you and saying, hey, this is for you. This is just as relevant for me. When I look back 5 years and I do this assessment, I'm like, man, I truly see the fruits of the Spirit in my life more deeply now than I did 5 years ago. It's happening. Things are working just right. But when I look back over the last 5 weeks or so, I'm like, what? Jason, you have changed course a little bit, and you're not getting what you're wanting. And so if you want to look more like Jesus, you better make a course correction. And I'm aware of that. And I'm in dialogue with God about it. And I need to rethink my spiritual routines and make sure I'm connecting with Jesus. Because the reality that we're going through something really hard is there, and the excuse is there. But if I use that as an excuse to become a horrendous person, it doesn't do me or anybody else any good. It's just going to get worse and worse. And I don't like what that looks like 5 years from now. I don't like future me if I don't do some course correction. So thankfully, I'm not locked into any of this. I can make changes to my routine, and I can talk to wise people that can help me. And thankfully, God gave me a wife that will call me out. And thankfully, I have the most supportive church on the face of the earth. But for some of you, you might be looking at yourself and going, wow, in some arena of your life, you're in the same boat. There's something going on in you, and you look 5 years down the road and you go, I don't want that exaggerated. You're taking small steps in the wrong direction these days, and it's time to identify it and correct it. And if so, I just encourage you to take that seriously. Because if you don't like what you're getting, you have to change what you're doing. And that just leads me to my final observation about all of this. when it comes to growth or accomplishing significant things, ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. Like small steps in the same direction over a long period of time will take you so much further than a short sprint. And again, that reminds me of Eloise and her late husband, Al. When Al went to be with Jesus, I went to the memorial, and I wasn't a part of performing it at that point. And I was just stunned because I realized that Al and Eloise had cultivated these unbelievable friendships. They had the same friends for decades. I mean, decades. And when those friends came and flew from wherever they were to come to the memorial, they said some of the most profound things. It was so rich. And it was so rich because they had known Al and they had known Eloise for so long. They had walked through so much life together. Their friendship and their love was incredibly deep. Guys, Eloise, she still has some of the best friends in the world, like the very best. People that really know her and have known her virtually her entire life. They're friends that you only get by being on a very long walk together. But what had to happen was they had to prioritize maintaining those friendships. And so even when they moved and they lived in different parts of the country, they would always make time to get together a couple of times a year, and they would call each other and they would write to each other and they would stay in touch. You just don't get friends like that in one weekend, even if it's like most intense weekend ever. You get friends like that by sharing a long life together. See, ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. And this is really true with pretty much anything that matters. It's true with friendships, it's true with marriage, it's true with parenting, it's true with trying to achieve great things, it's true with learning to play an instrument, it's true in learning a skill, it's true with career development, and it's definitely true when it comes to our character. If you keep going in the same direction and things get deeper and better in an incremental fashion, it's actually astounding what could happen in you over time. And this is the phenomenon that's sometimes referred to as compound interest. Albert Einstein said this. He said, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." Some of you are like, well, wait a minute. I thought this was a message about character. Some were talking about money. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about character. You just think of anything, if it keeps growing by 50% year after year after year, if it just keeps growing and growing, the growth will eventually become unbelievable. The principle of compound interest, it's not just a financial principle. It's a principle of growth in any realm. And this is why staying with something over time is so powerful. I found an illustration of this that I think is really cool. And if you are a science nerd, I think this will be exhilarating for you. You might have a hard time sitting still. Because this is a physical demonstration of compound interest. It's not about money, it's about dominoes. Some of you may have seen this. But I think this is pretty awesome. Let's roll this.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes, and the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds, and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
Boom. Drop the mic, man. But you think about that, that's pretty incredible. The 29th domino, that was 13. The 29th domino would be the size of the Empire State Building. The first domino had to be held with tweezers. It was so small. And just by increasing 1.5 times per domino over time, this is how compound interest works. They get huge. But here's the deal. You can't stop at the third domino and say, oh, I don't really see anything happening. It's a big deal here, and I'm just going to walk away. This is stupid. Seriously, come on. We've all heard examples of this. I tried reading the Bible once, and I didn't get it. Okay. I took my wife out on a date night one time, and nothing really happened. Okay. Try doing the dishes every single night and helping fold laundry and be nice to her all the time. See what happens then. Stay with it. We want big results with very little effort immediately. That's just not how life works, man. You have to keep walking in the same direction for a long, long time. And here's the thing, even if your steps are really small, if you keep walking, if you keep going, it's amazing what can happen over time. C.S. Lewis warns us that this is true, that this is really true, but it could be good or bad, depending on the direction you're walking. He writes, good and evil both increase at compound interest. Compound interest is always at play. It can work for you or it can work against you. It completely depends on what direction you're going. Small, consistent steps will lead to unimaginably large outcomes. And that can be good or not so good. If you keep doing what you're doing, it's going to increase something exponentially. So to close, I just want to leave you with a fairly significant question to reflect on. Where are your little steps right now taking you? Where are your little steps taking you? Because you in 5 years is really predictable. It's just more of whatever is happening right now. So where in your life do you need to keep going? Don't give up. Keep going. Don't give up. Keep walking. Keep going. What in your life is good? Keep going in that direction. And then what in your life is not so good? It's not so good. And if you look at that played out in 5 years with compound interest, it's actually scary. Because you don't want compound interest on that one. You don't.